In the freezing expanse of the North American woodlands, particularly among the Algonquian-speaking peoples, winter was historically a time of profound silence and scarcity. The deep snows limited travel, game animals vanished into hibernation, and isolation became a defining feature of survival for widely scattered communities. As food stores dwindled and the cold intensified, the psychological pressure of starvation began to erode the social boundaries that held these groups together. The fear was not just of dying, but of what a person might be willing to do to stay alive when the hunger became unbearable. This desperate atmosphere gave rise to the legend of the Wendigo, a malevolent spirit that possesses a human being who has resorted to cannibalism to survive. Once the taboo was broken and human flesh was consumed, the person physically transformed into a gaunt, emaciated giant with skin pulled tight over protruding bones. The creature's defining characteristic is an insatiable, agonizing hunger that grows in direct proportion to the amount of flesh it consumes. It effectively becomes a biological embodiment of greed, growing larger with every meal, but never finding satisfaction or fullness. Communities lived in terror of this transformation, often ostracizing or executing individuals who showed signs of what early anthropologists termed Wendigo psychosis. Those afflicted believed they were possessed, claiming they could see the fat of their family members glowing and felt an overwhelming compulsion to attack. The threat was eventually neutralized not by hunting a beast, but by the intervention of medicine men or the tragic killing of the afflicted individual to protect the group. Medical historians later debated whether this was a culture-bound syndrome brought on by extreme isolation or a metabolic reaction to a diet consisting only of lean meat. Narratives surrounding the creature shifted over the centuries, moving from a literal warning against cannibalism to a metaphor for colonial expansion and environmental destruction. Authors and filmmakers adopted the entity, stripping away the nuance of starvation to create a generic monster for popular entertainment. The legend remains a potent expression of the fear that civilization is a fragile veneer, easily stripped away by the brutal mathematics of survival. A skeletal figure stalking the tree line suggests that there is a point where hunger consumes humanity entirely. In the rural provinces of the Philippines, specifically within the Visayan folklore tradition, the night holds a terror that disguises itself as an ordinary neighbor during the day. Locals speak of a creature that walks among the living as a beautiful woman, indistinguishable from any other member of the community until the sun sets. The driving force behind this entity is a specific, biological hunger for the unborn, coupled with a pact made with dark forces to maintain eternal youth and power. She exists in a state of constant duality, suppressing her monstrous nature to navigate human society while waiting for the cover of darkness. The transformation occurs in seclusion, where the woman anoints her body with oil and willfully separates her torso from her lower extremities. Huge bat-like wings sprout from her back, allowing the upper half of her body to fly into the night while her legs remain standing, vulnerable and hidden. She hunts by landing silently on the thatched roofs of expectant mothers, using an elongated, proboscis-like tongue to slip through the cracks in the ceiling. The creature extracts the heart of the fetus or the blood of the sleeping victim, draining the life essence without waking the household. This predatory cycle leaves physical evidence in the form of unexplained miscarriages and anemia, which communities traditionally attributed to the creature's nocturnal visits. Defense against the monster relies on locating her severed lower half and sprinkling it with salt, ash, or crushed garlic. If the torso cannot reattach itself to the tainted lower body before the first rays of the sun appear, the creature is destroyed by the light. Colonial influence played a significant role in shaping the myth, as Spanish missionaries utilized local fears of such demons to demonize indigenous female shamans. The legend persisted through oral tradition and eventually became a staple of Philippine cinema, evolving from a genuine rural superstition to a pop culture icon. Sensationalist tabloids in Manila have occasionally run headlines during times of social unrest, claiming sightings of the creature to distract the populace. The story endures as a gruesome representation of the fear of the unknown enemy within one's own circle, the monster that wears a friendly face by day. A pair of legs standing alone in a bamboo grove remains one of the most unsettling images in Asian folklore. In the isolated Northern Isles of Scotland, particularly Orkney, the ocean was the source of all life, but also the bringer of sudden, violent death. The islanders developed a mythology that reflected the harsh brutality of their environment, culminating in a demon considered the most grotesque in all of Celtic lore. Anxiety revolved around the failure of crops, the death of livestock, and the mysterious plagues that could sweep through a small island community without warning. These calamities were not viewed as random chance, but as the deliberate work of a malevolent entity rising from the sea foam. The Nuckelavee appears as a horse and rider fused into a single biological nightmare, yet the rider has no legs and his torso grows directly from the beast's back. Its defining horror is the complete absence of skin, exposing raw, pulsating muscles and yellow veins pumping black blood for all to see. The creature's breath was toxic, capable of wilting crops instantly and spreading disease among cattle, while its presence alone terrified the elements. It was a demon of unadulterated spite, held in check only by the mither of the sea during the summer months and its inability to cross fresh-flowing water. Encounters with the beast led to immediate flight. If a traveler could cross a stream or a loch, the monster would be forced to abandon the chase. The mere mention of its name was once considered dangerous, prompting locals to say a quick prayer for protection immediately after speaking it. Folklore collector Walter Traill Dennison recorded the most detailed accounts in the late 19th century, preserving the oral traditions that were beginning to fade. As the industrial age arrived, the fear of the Nuckelavee subsided, replaced by modern concerns, yet the story remained a staple of Orcadian identity. Contemporary interpretations often view the skinless beast as a precursor to eco-horror, representing nature stripped raw and fighting back with toxicity. It stands as a symbol of the sea's capacity for destruction, completely devoid of the romanticism often found in mainland Celtic myths. The image of a skinless horseman emerging from the surf serves as a reminder of the fragility of the barrier between the living body and the elements. It is the ultimate biological violation, a creature that is nothing but pain and exposure made manifest. In the folklore of the Edo period in Japan, the natural world was filled with yokai, spirits that could inhabit objects, animals, and landscapes. Among these entities, the Jorōgumo stands out as a master of deception, originating from the observation of the golden orb weaver spider. The legend suggests that when a spider reaches the age of 400 years, it gains magical agency and the power to shapeshift into human form. This transformation is driven by a predatory instinct to feed on humans, specifically young men who are easily swayed by beauty. The creature typically appears as a seductive woman, often playing a biwa, a traditional Japanese lute, to lure travelers into her secluded home. Once the victim is distracted by the music and her charm, she reveals her true form, binding the man in steel-strong silk. The most famous account is centered at Joran Falls in Shizuoka, where the creature was said to drag woodcutters into the basin to devour them. Victims are not killed instantly, they are stored and eaten slowly, a fate that emphasizes the yokai's cruel and calculating patience. Villagers in these regions develop specific taboos, such as refusing to kill spiders inside the house at night, fearing retribution from the Jorōgumo. The legend served as a supernatural enforcement of caution, warning men against the dangers of solitary travel and the allure of strangers. Over time, the story was adapted into kabuki theater plays and classical literature, cementing the Spider-Woman as a tragic but deadly antagonist. Unlike Western depictions of giant spiders which are simply beasts, the Japanese interpretation retains human intelligence and emotional manipulation. Cultural historians view the myth as a reflection of societal anxieties regarding female sexuality and power during a strictly patriarchal era. The spider represents a subversion of the expected domestic role, turning the home into a slaughterhouse. The Jorōgumo remains a compelling figure because she represents the trap that looks like a haven. It is the beautiful melody drifting from a dark shack that signals the end of the road. Across the vast plains of the Llanos, spanning Venezuela and Colombia, a legend wanders the flatlands that is distinct for its auditory horror. The figure is known as El Silbón, or the Whistler, a towering, emaciated entity condemned to walk the earth forever. The story begins with a spoiled young man who developed a taste for deer entrails and demanded his father hunt for him. When the father returned empty-handed, the son's entitlement turned to a murderous rage that violated the most sacred family bonds. He killed his father and butchered him, an act that prompted his grandfather to tie him to a post, whip him, and rub hot peppers into the wounds. The grandfather cursed him to carry his father's bones for eternity and unleashed rabid dogs to chase him into the wilderness. The entity now roams the plains carrying a sack containing those skeletal remains, searching for travelers or drunks to terrorize. His presence is announced by a chilling whistle that follows the musical scale C-D-E-F-G-A-B, rising in pitch. The horror lies in the deception of the sound. If the whistle sounds loud and close, El Silbón is far away, but if it sounds faint and distant, he is standing right next to you. Legend dictates that he enters homes to count the bones in his bag. If no one notices him, a member of the household will die by morning. This belief system integrated deeply into the culture of the Llaneros, serving as a stark warning against disrespecting one's parents. The myth implies that the only things the creature fears are the sound of a barking dog, a whip, and chili peppers, recalling his original punishment. In recent decades, the character has become a regional icon, featured in songs and festivals, though the underlying fear remains in remote areas. It captures the specific anxiety of the open plains, where sound travels far and isolation is absolute. El Silbón represents the weight of guilt, quite literally carried on the back, and the inescapability of one's past crimes. The faint sound of whistling on a dark night remains a trigger for primal fear in the region. Throughout the Malay archipelago, the Pontianak is recognized as the most vengeful and terrifying spirit in the pantheon of ghosts. She is the spirit of a woman who died while pregnant or during childbirth, a tragedy that transforms grief into a lethal supernatural rage. The myth stems from the high maternal mortality rates of the past, manifesting the community's collective sorrow and guilt over these untimely deaths. Instead of finding peace, the spirit remains tethered to the living world, driven by an intense hatred for men and a jealousy of motherhood. Her arrival is often signaled by sensory cues. First, the sweet, heavy scent of plumeria flowers, which abruptly shifts to the stench of rotting flesh. She appears as a pale woman with long black hair covering her face, dressed in white, often spotted near banana trees where she is said to reside. When she attacks, she uses razor-sharp fingernails to rip open the stomachs of her victims, devouring the internal organs with savage precision. Folklore suggests she can also prey on vulnerable newborn babies, forcing villagers to practice protective rituals such as placing sharp objects near a baby's crib. To subdue a Pontianak, legends claim one must drive a long iron nail into the hole at the nape of her neck, which reverts her to a beautiful, harmless woman. This specific detail suggests a desire to domesticate the wild, uncontrollable force of female rage. The city of Pontianak in Indonesia is actually named after this creature, as the founding sultan supposedly had to fire cannons to clear the ghosts from the area. In the mid-20th century, the Pontianak became a central figure in Malaysian and Singaporean cinema, solidifying her image in the modern consciousness. Despite urbanization, the fear persists. Taxi drivers in the region still share stories of picking up female passengers who vanish, leaving behind the smell of flowers. She represents the trauma of loss that cannot be buried, a grief so powerful it becomes predatory. The Pontianak is not just a monster. She is a tragedy that refuses to be ignored. A white dress glimpsed in the peripheral vision remains a potent sign that the past is never truly dead. In the Inuit cultures of the Arctic, the environment is an adversary that requires constant vigilance, particularly the treacherous transition between ice and open water. Here, elders speak of the Qalupalik, a human-like creature with green, slimy skin who lives beneath the freezing waves. The myth was born from the absolute necessity of keeping children away from the shore, where slipping into the water meant almost certain hypothermia and death. To enforce this boundary, the Qalupalik is described as waiting patiently under the ice, listening for the footsteps of disobedient youth. The creature wears an amauti, a traditional parka with a large pouch on the back meant for carrying a baby, but hers is used for abduction. She emits a distinctive humming sound, or taps her fingernails against the ice from below to lure curious children closer to the cracks. Once a child is within reach, she snatches them, stuffs them into her parka, and dives back into the depths to keep them forever. The horror is specific to the fear of drowning and freezing. The child is not eaten, but suspended in a cold, dark stasis away from their family. Parents would tell this story not just to scare, but to provide a concrete visualization of an invisible danger. If a child heard the ice cracking or shifting, they associated it with the monster's tapping, prompting them to run for safety immediately. This oral tradition was effectively preserved and later adapted into stop-motion animation and children's books, maintaining its relevance. As the Arctic ice thins due to climate change, the traditional hunting grounds become more dangerous, giving the myth a renewed, urgent potency. Unlike monsters that can be fought with weapons, the Qalupalik represents a force of nature that can only be avoided through wisdom and caution. She is the personification of the freezing ocean's indifference to human life. The story ensures that even when adults aren't watching, the landscape itself is policing the children's safety. A tapping sound from beneath the ice remains the most effective alarm system in the Arctic North. In the desolate, diamond-rich region of the Richtersveld in South Africa, legends speak of a creature that predates the current order of the natural world. The Grootslang, or Great Snake, is described as a primal mistake made by the gods during the chaos of creation. The myth asserts that the gods inadvertently created a beast with the immense strength of an elephant and the high intelligence of a serpent. Realizing this combination was too powerful and threatened the balance of life, they attempted to split the creature into two separate species. However, one original Grootslang escaped this separation, fleeing into the deep subterranean caverns of the Orange River area. It grew to a colossal size, typically reported as being 40 to 50 feet long, becoming a lord of the underground darkness. The creature is said to covet diamonds, luring treasure hunters into its lair, known as the Wonder Hole, only to crush them. In 1917, an English prospector named Peter Grayson disappeared while exploring the region, fueling rumors that he had fallen victim to the beast's guardianship. Local tribes historically respected the river and the cave, avoiding the area to prevent provoking the creature's wrath. The legend effectively kept outsiders away from specific resource-rich locations, acting as a supernatural barrier to exploitation. Cryptozoologists have long speculated that the legend might be based on exaggerated sightings of pythons or swimming elephants, but the hybrid description persists. The Wonder Hole connects to the sea, according to lore, suggesting an abyssal network that humans are not meant to map. The Grootslang serves as a warning against the greed that drove the diamond rush, symbolizing the deadly cost of extracting wealth from the earth. It is a reminder that there are places in the world that are older and more dangerous than human ambition. The creature represents the terrifying idea of evolutionary perfection that was never meant to exist. A monster with the mind of a snake and the weight of an elephant is a force that cannot be reasoned with. Long before the Headless Horseman appeared in American literature, the Irish countryside was haunted by the Dullahan, a far more ancient and sinister entity. Rooted in pre-Christian Celtic mythology, this figure is a dark messenger of the Unseelie Court, often associated with the Crom Dubh sacrifice festival. Unlike a ghost seeking a lost body part, the Dullahan carries his severed head in his hand, raising it high to see across vast distances. The head glows with the phosphorescence of decaying matter, serving as a lantern to guide his path through the pitch-black night. He rides a black horse with sparks flying from its hooves and wields a whip made from a human spine to lash out at anyone who dares to watch him. His purpose is singular and absolute. When the Dullahan stops his horse, a mortal dies immediately at that location. There are no gates or locked doors that can bar his entry, but folklore provides one strange defense. He is irrationally terrified of gold. If he catches someone spying on him, he may throw a basin of blood on them, marking them as his next target, or lash out their eyes with his whip. The legend migrated to America with Irish immigrants, where Washington Irving sanitized it into the Headless Horseman, removing the more gruesome Celtic elements. In the original myth, he is not a soldier killed in battle, but a personification of the inevitability of death itself. While the Banshee warns of death, the Dullahan is the active agent, the one who comes to collect the soul without negotiation. The story enforced a curfew, keeping people indoors at night and discouraging them from looking out their windows when they heard hoofbeats. Modern historians view the Dullahan as a remnant of headhunting cults in Iron Age Europe, where the head was believed to contain the soul. Today, the figure appears in fantasy video games and anime, often returning to his headless roots. The Dullahan remains terrifying because he cannot be reasoned with. He has no head to hear your pleas. The sound of a horse stopping outside your door is the final sound you will ever hear. In the collective consciousness of Mexico and much of Latin America, no figure commands more fear and pity than La Llorona, the weeping woman. While details vary by region, the core of the story is always a tragedy involving class, betrayal, and the destruction of the family unit. Most versions describe a beautiful indigenous or mestizo woman named Maria who falls in love with a wealthy Spanish nobleman. After bearing him 2 children, he abandons her to marry a woman of his own class, shattering Maria's sanity. In a moment of blind, white-hot rage, she takes her children to the river and drowns them to sever the tie to the man who scorned her. Immediately realizing what she has done, she succumbs to grief and drowns herself, but is denied entry into the afterlife. She is cursed to wander the riverbanks for eternity, weeping and screaming, "Oh, my children!" Her spirit is malevolent to the living. She is said to kidnap wandering children, mistaking them for her own, and drowning them in the water. For generations, parents have used the legend to keep children inside at night, turning the river into a boundary of terror. Hearing her cry is considered an omen of misfortune or death for anyone unfortunate enough to be near. Historians trace the roots of the myth back to the Aztec goddess Cihuacoatl, who wept for her people before the Spanish conquest, blending indigenous and colonial trauma. The story has been immortalized in the folk song La Llorona, ensuring the narrative survives through music as well as fear. Recent global horror films have introduced her to a wider audience, though often stripping away the cultural nuance of the class struggle. She is more than a ghost. She is a symbol of the unresolved grief of a nation and the destructive power of abandonment. La Llorona embodies the idea that some mistakes are so great they echo forever. A weeping voice near the water remains the sound of a regret that can never be fixed. In Japanese folklore, the Gashadokuro is a colossal skeleton that manifests the horror of anonymous mass death. Unlike ghosts born from a single person's grudge, this entity is formed from the amassed souls of hundreds of people who died of starvation or in battle. During periods of famine or war, bodies were often left rotting in the fields, denied the burial rites necessary for the spirit to move on. These abandoned souls, fueled by anger and the pain of dying alone, coalesce into a single massive consciousness. The resulting monster stands 15 times taller than a human, a towering construct of bleached bone that wanders the countryside after midnight. Despite its immense size, it moves with impossible silence, stalking lone travelers who are foolish enough to be out in the dark. The only warning a victim receives is a high-pitched ringing in their ears, a sound caused by the spiritual energy of the approaching giant. Once it strikes, it grabs the human, bites off their head, and drinks the spraying blood to temporarily sate its eternal thirst. Shinto beliefs place high importance on the purification of death. The Gashadokuro is the ultimate manifestation of spiritual pollution, or kegare. It represents the breakdown of social order, where the community fails to care for its dead. The most famous depiction comes from a 19th century woodblock print by Kuniyoshi, depicting the skeleton looming over a samurai, which defined its modern look. In modern pop culture, from anime to video games, the Gashadokuro appears as a formidable boss, stripping away the tragedy for visual spectacle. However, the root of the myth is a somber reminder of the consequences of war and the importance of remembrance. It suggests that the forgotten dead do not simply vanish. They combine to become a problem for the living. The Gashadokuro is a monument to neglect, a walking graveyard constructed of rage. It teaches that a society is judged by how it treats its fallen. In the lore of the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, the Bunyip is a cryptid that inhabits the swamps, billabongs, and riverbeds of the bush. The word Bunyip roughly translates to devil or evil spirit in the Wemba Wemba language, though its description varies wildly across the continent. Some theories suggest the myth originated from cultural memories of the Diprotodon, a massive prehistoric marsupial that went extinct thousands of years ago. Over millennia, this megafauna evolved in the oral tradition into a supernatural predator that lurks in the murky water. Descriptions range from a dog-faced seal to a long-necked reptile, but the consistent element is its booming roar which chills the blood. This sound is said to cause temporary paralysis in those who hear it, allowing the creature to close the distance on its prey. It prefers to hunt at night, targeting women and children who wander too close to the water's edge, devouring them completely. When European settlers arrived, they took the legend seriously, with 19th century newspapers frequently reporting sightings and organizing hunting parties. The inability of the settlers to categorize the strange Australian fauna led them to believe a new, dangerous species was waiting to be discovered. A skull found in 1846 was famously put on display as a Bunyip skull, though it was later identified as a deformed horse or calf. In the 20th century, the image of the Bunyip softened significantly, becoming a staple of children's literature as a shy, misunderstood creature. However, in the original Dreaming stories, the entity commands respect and fear, serving as a guardian of the waterholes. It embodies the danger of the Australian landscape, where water is life-giving but also hides ancient threats. The Bunyip is the master of the billabong, the thing that makes a camper hesitate before dipping a toe in the dark water. Whether a relic of extinct megafauna or a spirit of the land, the Bunyip represents the deep, unknown history of the continent. A roar echoing across a swamp at midnight needs no translation to be terrifying.